Hey, folks, Zach Osterman here. Mike Niziolek there. Wilmington Herald Times, Indianapolis Star, Indiana 56, Nebraska 7. Mike, I think we've talked in the last couple wins about reframing expectations around this team, around this season. I feel like you can only really have one expectation at this point, which is that until they prove otherwise, and they might at some point, they might next week against Washington, who knows? But until Indiana proves otherwise, you've got to treat this like a Big Ten contender, which means you've got to treat this like a playoff contender because that is the kind of football Indiana's playing.
Yeah, I think the headline I put on my story today was Indiana is one of the best teams in college football. It's that simple. I mean, a blowout like this against, I think there was two discussions. Is India coming into this game? Is Indiana's offense for real? And how good is Nebraska's defense? We learned. Well,
Kurt Cignetti had some thoughts.
I think we know.
Kurt Cignetti had some thoughts.
I think we know. Maybe Nebraska's defense wasn't as good as everyone.
Turning in live from Shalubi's. We're live. I thought we were live at Shalubi's.
Zach's favorite joke. But no, I think there'll be questions now about Nebraska's defense. But look, this was a just out and out 3-phase dominance. They outcoached them. They played better. They ran all over them against a team historically that's had not just this year, but historically has held teams on the ground to very little production.
Is it the first team this season to rush for 200 against Nebraska? It's only the second team since, and suddenly his name has gone out of my head. I just had it, but Nebraska's defense coordinator has been there for 2 years now. This is only the second team to rush for 200 against Nebraska since he got there.
That's the reputation.
The other was Michigan, and Michigan last year, national champion Michigan last year.
And then special teams, and then obviously offensively, I think we knew that there was a gap there. But then, I think the only shadow that hangs over this game is Curtis Rourke's injuries. We'll talk about that, but the backup quarterback comes in, and the defense goes crazy, forces 4 turnovers, and the offense scores, I think, every time they had the ball after a turnover. So, what's what can you – I
asked you at one point, James Evans went out to punt in the fourth quarter, and I asked, does he remember how?
No, my favorite part of the post-game press conference was Kurt Cignetti does a brief intro. He's like, we did drop a pass.
Yeah.
And that was I guess that's the
I thought something that was interesting. I thought Indiana surprised itself a little bit today. I think and Kurt Cignetti is always going to be like, no complacency, guard against it. It's my job. But for example, we talked to Tyson Lawton, he finished with 8 carries for 64 yards and a touchdown. And obviously he's, alongside Justice Ellison, he's been Indiana's kind of half of Indiana's main running back rotation this year. And he said, we thought the holes would be tight today. We thought, that defensive line, that defensive front, we had a ton of respect for him. We thought it was going to be difficult. And he basically just said, they might have been the widest holes I've been running through all year. And, however you kind of want to take this, the direction, they held Nebraska to 2.4 rushing yards. They weren't a good rushing team. No, but they dominated the line of scrimmage, and that led to he was completely rattled. He threw 3 picks, which is as many as he'd thrown all season coming into this game. You talk about basically the opposite of rattled. Tav Jackson comes in after Curtis Rourke gets hurt, and obviously Indiana doesn't need a ton from him because they're already up 3 scores.
That throw to the corner. You don't make that throw. You don't attempt that throw.
And also 7 of 8 for 91 yards and 2 touchdowns against a Big Ten defense is
completed his first 6 minutes.
Yeah, that's there's just you have just. Urban Meyer, before this game, made a really big deal whenever anybody asked him to talk about it, about how well coached he thought Indiana was. And you watch a game like this, and you see the way, second teamers play. You have to make a quarterback change in the way that quarterback plays. You see how, the extent to which it felt like this defense never really kind of gave up on the idea that, no matter what the score is, we're not going to stop. It's really hard to look at this team and not wonder if certainly you say it's one of the best teams in the country. It is almost certainly one of the best coached teams in the country. The job that Kurt Cignetti and his staff have done, taking a team that was turned over by more than half off the last season's roster. And yes, they got a lot of veteran transfers, but they had to go get those. They had to identify those players. Then they had to get them. Then they had to put, mesh the whole thing together in just one off season. And listen, I don't know where this ends for Indiana. I can't tell you, and I'm not going to make any promises. But I just I grew up in the South. I know what good football looks like. this
also know bad football.
Yeah, and this is.
But instead of going big picture yet, I think the key stretch of the game for me, Kirk Cignetti said it was the interception in the second half. I thought it was actually the early in the game, and Justice Ellison talked about this. First thing was he said getting a rushing touchdown and getting rushing yards and having a big gain on that first drive thought was really important. This team had a lot of rushing touchdown all year. And there was a lot of talk about that, what they could do. He's like, I really thought if we could score that, like right off the bat, and punch that in, that would sort of open everything up. And it did, I think.
I don't know if you were there yet when he talked about that, and he said basically, when we did that, I thought
it was going to be not going to be a close game.
We might just be able to roll them.
And then the second one was Jalen Walker's forced fumble because Cignetti took a couple gambles early. He went for it on fourth down on both their first possessions. We talked about, kind of debated the merits of those decisions. The second one didn't work out. Kurt's work was sacked, gave Nebraska a really good field position when they could have gone up 10-0. But part of, I think, the equation is I have faith in my defense that we're going to make a play and stop them. They stopped Nebraska on a fourth down. Jalen Walker punches out the ball, and that, really, it's ball game. Really, that was not, they just kind of had their way with it afterward. And I think you see the coaching staff's confidence in the players, and the players stepping up for the coaches. And I think you saw that then what Cincinnati was talking about in the second half, where, he's mentioned like they didn't go for the jugular in certain games. Man, they did it today with those 4 forced turnovers in the second half and offensively sort of doing it. So I think, before the game kind of got, crazy in the second half for Indiana, I thought those kind of things stood out early, where there were a couple moments where maybe this game doesn't look like exactly like it did, where it's one of the biggest wins in a program history against a Big Ten opponent.
Well, and I think it's a reflection. This would have been a very easy week to get distracted. You're coming off the bye week. You've spent a lot of the bye week. Obviously, coaches have been recruiting and things, but there's also a lot.
Is handing out free beer, free Dragonfly,
free floppies. The floppy Sammies. You've got like your quarterback on the Heisman podcast. Didn't know they had a Heisman podcast, but apparently he was on it. You've got Kurt Cignetti doing a media tour. National media's in town to write about Indiana. The last 2-3 weeks. You got big noon kickoff here. There are a ton of rumors about ESPN Game Day. I think, by the way, before anybody asks, I assume we would probably find out about that sometime Saturday night. I think that is normally when they tend to announce.
Brett Vanderbilt probably does.
Maybe. If this was their first choice, then there's really no reason to wait. But we'll see. I would expect to find out sometime Saturday, one way or the other. I think they announce on Saturday where they are going the next Saturday. But there was a lot of reason to be distracted. Like there was, I had multiple friends, like other media colleagues who are obviously just Indiana agnostic, but they know I cover IU football. We talk about it sometimes. Who said, like, is this the kind of like the train off the tracks game where basically they've had too much success. They get a little too full of it. They're playing a decent team. They get distracted. And the answer was so emphatically no that the train turned into a jumbo jet and is now flying across the Pacific Ocean.
I think that analogy works in any way.
Well, it was like the transportation age evolving from the train to the jet. I think it's on the moon at this point. But my point is, I know you don't want to go too big picture, but like it's the big picture and the small picture like tie in perfectly together when you beat a ranked team 56-7. And
it won't be ranked.
No, they will not be ranked tomorrow. If they are, then it will be a tremendous show of respect to Indiana. There's nothing. Like, how many penalties? Indiana had 4 penalties. I guess that wasn't great. I don't know. It's like you said, Curtis is like, we did have the one drop. Like, it was,
And the interception they had that Curtis Rourke.
That doesn't count. Like, that's.
Well, let's talk about Rourke's injury. Because that is, I think, the shadow.
It's a thumb. It looks very much like it's a thumb. Whether is it just a nail? Is it something structural within the thumb?
Yeah, we saw him after the game. There's video up on my Twitter feed of him walking, and they were purposely having him keep his hand in his pocket so people couldn't see it. And so Kurt Cignetti had told a sideline reporter at the half
like Kevin Costner in Field of Dreams. It's not a gun, it's your finger.
He was fine, and after the game, he kind of said, "We'll know more tomorrow."
He said, optimistic.
But optimistic. So there's that. Do you rush it back? What's that's the kind of the
I think the question,
answer, right?
honestly, the question is just like what the long-term re-aggravation concern is. Because if there isn't a big one, if it's
the
just
follow-up question
basically what it looked like he was struggling with was gripping the football.
Yeah.
Because he threw, I think, 4 passes in total after the injury. There was the one really good-looking one that was broken up by good Nebraska coverage. He had like 2, and then the Hail Mary where I recognize the pass itself didn't matter and nobody cares, but like he threw it very short for how long we know he can air the ball out. So the question is basically because you can't give him, I assume, like a pain-killing injection because he's got to have feeling in the thumb to be able to grip the ball.
Well, my question was that I would have asked as a follow-up was if the game was anywhere close because they felt comfortable leaving him in. Like what happened at halftime and would it have mattered? Like, would they have tried it? Like,
but he didn't even come out. He never came out in uniform after halftime. Like, it was clearly a decision made at halftime to say 28-7, we're going to Taven. And, Chris Signetti had some nice things to say about Tav Jackson. He said he's still got to get better. He's got to be more consistent in practice. But then he also said, but listen, like, it's hard to get better sometimes as a backup quarterback, especially at this time of year, because you're not getting a ton of reps. Your first string quarterback is the one getting all the repetitions. He's the one that's getting all the new stuff installed for him. He's the one that is everything's kind of building and coalescing around. It's hard to you can't judge. I think what he's trying to say is you can't judge a backup quarterback by the standards of a starting quarterback in season because a starting quarterback just has advantages.
Yeah, because he's saying they installed development that Taven doesn't even get to play.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And so that's why I think you are encouraged by the way that he played, frankly. And they called a couple plays that were easy for him, but man, like he looked poised, like he didn't look rattled. He was going through his progressions well. When it was quick stuff, when it was like the touchdown pass he threw to Miles Cross, that was just like the easy play action fake, but it was like even that. Everything was smooth. Yeah, like even throws like that can be difficult sometimes because they seem easy, but you can't put it behind a player in that situation because it's so lateral. It'll slow him down. You can't put it too far ahead, or obviously he'll drop it, or in some cases you risk an interception.
But I do think, it'll just be the question of the week in terms of it'll dominate the storylines. And Signetti only talks on Mondays, and so
it's a coach's show. I'm sure it'll come up there, but we'll see.
We'll see.
I mean, I don't think he would come out and say in the same way that he did with Jalen Walker after Northwestern, and Walker was obviously fine. He played all day today.
Yeah, I thought there would be more subterfuge, and he's just like, he's fine. He's going to play. And how much is he going to play?
I don't think he would say, I'm optimistic if he wasn't genuinely optimistic.
Well, it's not a broken wrist.
And because there's no reason to be like, oh, I'm really optimistic. Oops. Yeah. I was optimistic, and I am now no longer. How did we like Jack Tuttle? Well, I don't know how Jack Tuttle's still in college, Greg Kelly. Mark, so this is a long-time listener. The question I have is it's MRK HSS. Mm-hmm. If we assume it's Mark, mm-hmm. What do we think the vowel in the last name is?
Hey.
Mark Haas?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So Mark Haas, he says, is there a historical Big Ten comparison to IU's turnaround? Are we looking more like a 1999 Rams or 2015 Leicester City situation? I know you don't know what 2015 Leicester City is. Leicester City was 25,000 to 1 to win the Premier League in 2016, and they did it. I think I actually think those are in their own ways both very good comparisons. That 99 Rams team did kind of come out of nowhere. And obviously part of it was because they built that team for Trent Green, and Trent Green was a good NFL quarterback, but then he got replaced by a guy who turned out to be a Hall of Famer. And so that just kind of changed the whole calculus. I mean, there is a bit of a Leicester City comparison there too, though, where I think Indiana I think I saw this because I get the emails from a couple of different sports books, oh, look at the Heisman odds this week and whatever. And at the beginning of the season, they'll send you odds on, basically everything you could imagine. And I think Indiana was something like plus 20,000 to make the playoff, which meant if you bet $1, you won $20,000. So at least I think that's what that means. I don't gamble enough to really understand odds, but it's just in Vegas. It's like, well, in that case, we would love it if we can comp your room, Mr. Osterman. Just come down here. But the point is, the Leicester City comparison is Hess. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. Mike is more sorry than I am, but the Leicester City comparison fits in the sense that nobody would have seen this coming. Now, listen, the flip side is one person would have seen it coming. Yeah, Kurt Signetti. But the flip side is they got to. They're still 5 games away. But listen, I mean, you have to talk about this team as a playoff contender. There's just no way around it. And yes, there are probably going to be teams in the Big Ten. Penn State's an example that will play tougher schedules overall. But if you win 11 games in the Big Ten, you are going to the playoff. Like, you just there's no way you're not.
It's when you look at the back half of their schedule, there's reasons not to be so fearful. Outside Ohio State, Michigan's quarterback situation is one of the worst in the country.
Yeah,
I mean, that was supposed to be their second.
You start talking about more of these games as trap games, frankly. Like, if game day's in town next week, you talk about Washington more like a trap game.
Yeah.
You talk about Michigan State, and it's like, well, you're probably a better team than Michigan State, but it's on the road and it's tough to play there. And it's you give. I know Kurt Signetti talks about complacency, but listen, we're not on his team. Like, we don't have to abide by this rule that we're never allowed to talk about any of this like it's never happened or whatever. I mean, you are allowed to start talking about some of these games and just saying, I mean, Indiana's going to be favored against Washington. They're probably going to be favored against Michigan State.
Probably. Out of your mind if they're not going to be. They're going to be favored by a touchdown. I
would be very surprised at this point if they're not favored against Michigan. I would love to know the last time that happened other than the COVID season.
They're going to be favored against Michigan.
I would love to know what, if someone is out there that makes odds, I would love to know what IU at Ohio State would open at tomorrow. If that was out there, I would love to know.
That'd be interesting.
Would it be within a touchdown?
I'd say like 4.5 Ohio State.
You think like that close?
I mean, how do you? I mean, at this point, like,
it is the way Indiana is winning.
If it's not, it's the reputation. Well, look here's a perfect. We talked about this. I talked to Tevin Coleman briefly, former IU running back, and I asked him what the perception of the team was when he came.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they thought we were trash.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's what I think is built into why people wouldn't take Indiana seriously.
I think that's why some people even wanted to see this more as a reflection of Nebraska than versus Indiana. Whereas, so I'm sorry, this is about Indiana.
That's literally what it is. Is that sting? And Urban Meyer talked about it. He's like, why? I mean, like, Bill Mary's their winningest coach, and he's like average 5 wins a year. I mean, like, look, this is not a program that's become accustomed to success in any way, shape, or form. So I think that reputation. Look, you're not going to be able to beat that in one season. Kurt Signetti's talking about that, but he doesn't also care.
Man, he doesn't care.
He's trying his best. He's trying his best.
Like,
he's trying his best.
You're only a couple more wins away from talking about like how
not even a playoff game, but like a playoff bye. And it's just like it's wild.
We're going to college.
Yeah, and I did. Justin Ellison was the first player I heard use the word playoff. A first player that used it. I said,
in fairness, Mikel Kamara has said natty a couple times. So like,
used it as slang, but like, I don't count it. He could be saying something completely. He might be drinking a natty light, so maybe that's what he's talking about.
I don't think that was the case.
But he said it, and I laughed. I was like, "Isn't that illegal? Like, is there a demerit system? Do you feel like Kurt Signetti's like no looking?" He said, he said today, which was not as catchy of a phrase. Tomorrow is a concept. I don't think it has the same ring as Google Me.
No.
I don't know if that'll catch on.
Too many syllables.
But tomorrow is a concept. So,
but the point is, the way this team is winning games, like, I mean, for example, you would have said, what is the biggest, like, sort of single thing Indiana can't afford to lose? It would have been Curtis Rourke. And I understand they were up 28-7, but the fact that they lose if you said who's the one player you can't pull out of this, because we talked about they've developed more depth than we thought at defensive line and their skill positions. And, that they've stayed relatively healthy on the offensive line and all this, other than Nick Kidwell's injury, obviously. If you said, like, what's the one thing more than anything else that could derail Indiana at this point in terms of what might happen on the field, it would be losing Curtis Rourke and all the praise that he's gotten. And I understand you're up 28-7, but you actually come out and perform other than total yards, but in terms of points, you perform better in the second half.
Your field position was so good, you couldn't even.
I understand that, but
they couldn't even do that.
Well, and here's something one of my buddies who covered Nebraska told me. At the end of the first half, Indiana was on pace to gain more yards than any team had ever gained on Nebraska, ever.
That makes sense.
Like in
pace was 650
something, 6. Yeah, I mean, but like it's just. The fact that you can even lose the player that I think the average fan or observer would identify as the most important, least replaceable player and actually get better on the scoreboard, that tells you that, again, it's a really well-coached team that is going to be hard to stop. Somebody's going to beat it somewhere, I assume, but...
I would reframe it into the sense, like, if they lose Rourke, they still probably win 10 games.
Yeah.
I think it lowers your ceiling a little bit, just because I think he was playing phenomenal when he went out before.
It was. I mean,
so,
but then that throw from Taven Jackson.
But I mean, it's going to be longer. It's a small sample size. And
sure.
It's going to be more competitive environments. But, I just think it lowers their ceiling a little bit. But I still think they're actually a pretty good team, even with the backup quarterback. And I don't know if you would. I mean, that's just like this is a well-oiled machine at this point. It's not one guy. It's not one position group. It's not the offense, like the defense. I mean, we're going to keep talking about the offense, for the rest of the season because it's just been so good. But the defense is right there.
Well, the defense. I think the relevant thing about the defense to me is if people had again these sort of if people had again these sorts of doubts about what might slow Indiana down, what might be an obstacle for Indiana. One of the things people justifiably pointed out is that Nebraska and Northwestern, the defense regressed a little bit. That compared to what it was doing to some of its non-conference opponents, Maryland and Northwestern. Sorry, the defense. If you looked at whether it was the raw numbers, the underlying numbers, the analytics and things, the offense was just like crazy outperforming all expectations. Everybody else in the conference, whatever. The defense had kind of come back to earth a little bit from some of the dominant performances against bad teams in non-conference play. I mean, today, 70 yards rushing allowed, 304 total yards allowed. What was it? 3 sacks in the end, I think. And then you said 5 turnovers forced.
2 sacks.
It was still only 2 and 5 turnovers forced. Like, if that was supposed to be, if that was supposed to be the weak point, if that was supposed to be the weakness, like I mean, I have covered. I mean, just to be brutally honest, a lot of bad football. Like I have, and I'm not picking on anybody. I'm not calling anybody out, coaches, players, whatever, but a lot of you have been around it with me. You were here for it last year. I have covered plenty of ugly football. This is
poetry in motion.
So far at the other end of the scale.
It's the best looking. And I've covered some decent offensive teams, Auburn teams that had a good offense, and some really on the opposite of that, like horrible teams. But this is the best offense I've ever seen. And
again, like I bring this up a lot, but it's not because they just have some freak athletes that can just beat everybody down the field, or like they have a Derrick Henry like running back that just can't. Like it is so well schemed.
It's not like when you get a generational player and that just lifts your offense. It's the complete anti-current era of college football where it's just like they've built this sort of special team and group of players, and scheme has a lot to do with it, and coaching has a lot to do with it, and it's just here we are.
We'll leave it there for now. We'll be back midweek. We swear we'll podcast this week. Things came up. We just couldn't make it work last week, but we promise we'll podcast this week. Will we be talking? All right, official prediction. Will we be talking about ESPN? By the time you listen to this, you probably already know if you aren't watching right now. Will Indiana be hosting game day next week?
I'm going to do it now. You got to do it. Right?
I think the answer is yes. I think you got to go ahead and do it.
Because Michigan's going to. If Michigan loses today, I don't think you can wait for Michigan. I think you do it now, and then because you can always do Ohio State anyway.
Yeah, you might see. Yeah, you might see them again at Ohio State.
The Big Ten championship. I mean, they could do game day 3 times.
I don't know. I genuinely, hand to God, I don't know that game day is coming, but I would predict. If you're asking me, is game day going to be here next week or not? I would say I think it is more likely than not they will be here. There we go. We'll leave it there. He's Mike Niziolek. I'm Zach Osterman for the Bloomington Herald Times for the Indianapolis Star.
See Zach at Shalubi's tonight. I imagine you're making
I'm doing some karaoke. Peaceful World by John Mellencamp 11 times in a row, and then I'm going home. Thank you so much for watching. Eat at Shalubi's. We'll talk to you soon.